The rain had been falling since late afternoon, steady and soft at first, like a shy visitor tapping at the windows. By evening, it had deepened into a rhythmic drumming, steady as a heartbeat, filling the little stone cottage with a sound both soothing and isolating. Outside, the world blurred, trees melted into shadowy shapes, their branches sagging under the weight of water. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp wood and the faint trace of lavender from the fire-warmed blankets. Isabel sat curled in her chair, a book resting half open on her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in over 20 minutes. She wasn't reading anymore. She was listening. Listening to the rain, yes, but also to the way it seemed to carry whispers. She had always loved storms. They gave her an excuse to stay indoors without guilt, to light the hearth and brew tea, to lose herself in worlds made of words. But tonight felt different. There was a heaviness to the weather, as if the clouds were not simply spilling rain but pressing the sky downward. A low fog clung to the hills, and the forest beyond the cottage looked impossibly dark, its outlines shifting like something alive. Isabel caught herself glancing toward the window more often than usual, each time expecting to see. What, exactly? She couldn't say. The feeling was neither fear nor excitement, but a strange mixture of both. Like being on the brink of a story you haven't yet been told. The kettle whistled sharply, startling her into motion. She poured the steaming water over dried chamomile blossoms, watching the pale gold tendrils curl upward, scenting the air with something calming and floral. But even as she breathed it in, she couldn't shake the pull of the outside world. She moved to the window and pressed her fingertips to the cold glass. Beyond the rain-slicked panes, the path leading into the forest glistened faintly under the scattered light of the oil lamp. She imagined footsteps there, splashing softly in the puddles, an image so vivid that her chest tightened, though no one was in sight. When the knock came, it was almost too gentle to hear over the storm. A single tap, then another, then silence. Isabel froze, her breath caught somewhere between her throat and her lungs. In her years living here, visitors were rare, and unannounced visitors at night were unheard of. She set her cup down and approached the door slowly, feeling the old wooden boards shift slightly beneath her weight. Another knock, firmer this time. She hesitated, then drew back the latch and opened the door just a crack. A man stood there, though man seemed too simple a word for what she saw. His shoulders filled the doorway, his cloak dripping rain onto the threshold, and his eyes, deep, amber, and unblinking, held hers with a strange intensity. His features were striking, almost beautiful, but edged with something wild, untamed. Behind him, the forest swayed, and for an instant, Isabel thought she saw something else moving in the shadows beyond, something large and hulking, a shape that vanished the moment she blinked. The silence inside the house was absolute, so complete that Emma could hear the faint drip of water falling from her umbrella onto the warped floorboards. The air was colder than outside, and it smelled faintly of damp wood and something sharper, like rust or old blood. Her eyes strained against the dark, searching for movement, but the only illumination came from the brief, silver-blue bursts of lightning sneaking through the window cracks. The walls seemed to close in around her, the hallway stretching long and narrow, its wallpaper curling and flaking as though it were shedding its skin. Each breath she took echoed too loudly, like the house itself was listening. Emma's instinct was to leave. She could almost feel the open door behind her, the storm still raging outside, ready to welcome her back into the familiar world. Yet some strange pull kept her rooted, an unsettling curiosity that overpowered her sense of danger. As her eyes adjusted, she noticed a faint glow seeping from beneath a door at the end of the hall. It was the same dim flicker she had seen upstairs, but now it seemed to bleed through the cracks in the wood, pulsing faintly like the beat of a heart. Each time the light swelled, the shadows around her shifted, bending unnaturally across the walls. She began to walk, her footsteps soft but heavy in the suffocating silence. The floor groaned under her weight, the sound traveling down the hall like a warning. Halfway there, she froze. A picture frame hung crooked on the wall to her left, its glass cracked, the image inside faded with age. But it wasn't the picture itself that made her stomach knot. It was the reflection. In the fractured glass, she could see herself holding the umbrella, her face pale and tense. But just behind her reflection stood another shape, taller, featureless, leaning unnaturally close. Emma spun around, but the hallway was empty. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she hurried the last few steps to the glowing door. The light beneath it flickered weakly now, as if it were fading the closer she came. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed the cold brass doorknob. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, the memory of the silent figure in the glass burning in her mind. Then, with a sharp inhale, she twisted the knob and pushed the door open. The hinges wailed, the sound sharp and grating, and the glow spilled out in a weak, sickly hue that reminded her more of dying embers than candlelight. Inside, the room was nearly bare. An old wooden chair sat in the center, its back turned toward her, illuminated by the faint orange glow of a lantern resting on the floor. The flames sputtered as though disturbed by an invisible hand. Dust hung thick in the air, disturbed only by her presence. Slowly, almost mechanically, the chair turned. But there was no one sitting in it. The wood creaked as it rotated on its own, the lantern light stretching the shadows into grotesque shapes that seemed to writhe against the walls. Then, as the chair faced her fully, the lantern went out, plunging Emma into total darkness. Darkness swallowed us as the lantern's flame died. My cousin's breath caught in his throat, and for a terrible heartbeat, we were blind. Then the house groaned, a deep, resonant sound that rattled the earth. Windows flared with light, throwing long, jagged beams across the field. It was closer now, impossibly close, its walls flexing like lungs with every breath. The old man's voice cut through the dark. It wants a trade. It always wants a trade. I spun toward him, straining to see his face. What kind of trade? I demanded, but even as I asked, I knew the answer wouldn't be simple. His silhouette was rigid, his hand trembling where the lantern had gone dark. A life, he said finally. Always a life. That's how it's fed. That's how it keeps standing when it should have rotted to nothing. One goes free if one stays behind. His words hung heavy, like chains that my cousin cursed, shaking his head violently. No, no, there has to be another way. But the house seemed to hear him. The field quivered, and shadows stretched long, reaching toward us like fingers. A voice, soft and endless, poured from the house. Familiar voices, layered atop one another. They spoke our names. My name, my cousin's, even the old man's. Each syllable felt like hooks pulling beneath the skin. The old man turned to us, eyes gleaming faintly in the glow of the windows. You think I've lived this long because I'm clever? His mouth twitched into a bitter smile. I've bargained before. I've paid my price. My stomach dropped. It explained the emptiness in his face, the way he spoke as if hollowed out. He had survived by sacrificing someone else. And now, the house was waiting for us to do the same. The glow from its windows flared brighter, the treeline burning with impossible light. My cousin clutched my arm, whispering, "Don't even think about it. We'll both get out. Together." But his grip trembled. He was terrified. Of the house. Of me. Of what choice might come next. And as the ground shivered and the whispers rose, I realized something chilling. The house didn't need to choose who was sacrificed. It only needed to watch us tear ourselves apart. Emma stood frozen at the foot of the staircase, her umbrella still clenched in her hand, as though it could shield her from the sound above. The rain outside seemed distant now, muffled by the walls, while every creak of the old floorboards upstairs rang sharp and deliberate. Someone, or something, was pacing, shifting weight from one side of the hallway to the other. The rhythm stopped, then started again, as if it was aware she was listening. The air at the bottom of the stairs was colder, a draft seeping down from above, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and something else, something sour, like decayed flowers left too long in stagnant water. With each step she took, the stairs answered her with groans that seemed too loud, too alive, echoing through the hollow frame of the house. Halfway up, she paused, her hand gripping the banister. Lightning flashed outside, and in that brief, electric instant, the shadows stretched across the stairwell, forming a tall, thin silhouette against the landing. Emma's breath caught, and she blinked hard. When her vision cleared, the landing was empty again, but her body knew the truth. She wasn't alone. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched out into darkness, lined with doors on either side. The footsteps she had heard moments earlier were gone, leaving behind a silence that pressed against her chest like a weight. She strained to listen, her ears buzzing with the effort, and then it came. The faint scrape of fingernails against wood. Slow, deliberate, drawn out. It was coming from the first door on her left. Emma's grip tightened on the umbrella until her knuckles turned white. A part of her screamed to run, but another part, pulled by the same morbid curiosity that had brought her inside, urged her forward. She reached the door, her pulse pounding so hard it made her temples ache. The scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so complete it seemed unnatural. She leaned closer, pressing her ear to the wood, holding her breath. For a moment there was nothing, and then a voice, faint but unmistakable, whispered her name. Emma. Her blood ran cold. She jerked back, stumbling against the opposite wall, her eyes wide in disbelief. No one here should know her name. No one should be able to speak it with such intimacy, as though they had been waiting for her all along. Before she could recover, the door handle rattled violently, the metal clanging against the frame as though unseen hands were trying to tear it open. The sound reverberated through the hallway, filling the space with a fury that was nothing like the measured knocking downstairs. Emma staggered backward, heart hammering, her voice breaking into a whisper. No, no. She turned and stumbled down the hallway, desperate to put distance between herself and that door. But as she reached the far end, another door creaked open on its own, just wide enough for her to see a sliver of the darkness within, and something pale shifting just beyond the threshold. Emma's lungs burned as she tried to quiet her breath, pressed against the hallway wall. The pale movement behind the door ahead drew her eyes like a magnet, though every instinct screamed to look away. The door remained slightly ajar, creaking faintly as though stirred by a draft that didn't exist. Lightning flickered through a crack in the roof, spilling a cold glow into the hallway. And in that instant she saw it clearly, a hand. Too white, too thin, its fingers unnaturally long, curling around the edge of the doorframe. It lingered there, unmoving, as if it knew she was watching. Her throat tightened. She wanted to run, but her legs betrayed her, trembling and weak. The hand withdrew into the darkness with a slow, deliberate grace, almost inviting her inside. Then, without warning, the door swung wide. The room beyond was revealed in a flash of lightning. Bare walls, a warped floor, and a single figure standing in the far corner. Emma's breath hitched. It was tall and thin, its skin pale to the point of translucence, its eyes two hollow shadows that reflected the brief light. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It only stood there, watching. The lightning faded, plunging the room back into near darkness, yet Emma could still see its outline. The figure seemed to absorb what little light there was, its edges blurred like smoke. And then, slowly, its head tilted. The motion was subtle but wrong, bending too far, as though its neck lacked bones. The sound that followed was not human, a low, rattling exhale that seemed to rattle the air itself. Emma's fear boiled over, a wave of primal terror so strong she thought her heart might give out. Still, she couldn't look away. Suddenly, the figure stepped forward. The floor didn't creak beneath its weight. Its feet didn't fall like normal footsteps, but glided, closing the space between them with impossible silence. Emma stumbled backward into the hall, her umbrella clattering to the ground. She reached for the banister, desperate to retreat, when the figure stopped in the doorway. It lingered there, half inside the room, half in the hall, and then whispered her name again. This time, the voice was clearer, raspy, wet, as though spoken through ruined lungs. Emma. Her scream tore free at last, raw and jagged. She fled down the hall, nearly tripping over the warped boards, her body driven only by terror. Behind her, the whisper rose into a guttural wail, not loud, but deep enough to vibrate the very walls. She darted down the stairs two at a time, the sound pursuing her, pressing against her back like a tide. Reaching the bottom, she stumbled into the front hall, only to find the front door she had entered through shut tight. She grabbed the knob, twisted hard, but it didn't budge. The storm outside raged, but the house wasn't going to let her leave. Not yet. Emma yanked at the front door until her hands ached, the brass knob slick with sweat and rainwater dripping from her clothes. No matter how hard she twisted or shoved, the door didn't budge, not even a rattle in the frame, as though the wood had grown around it. Her breath came in ragged bursts, and she turned, scanning the hallway wildly for another way out. The storm outside howled through the cracks in the walls, but the house itself seemed to swallow the sound, leaving her trapped in a silence punctuated only by her heartbeat. She stumbled toward a side window, the glass fogged with moisture. Pressing her palms against it, she peered through the rain-streaked pane. For a moment she felt hope. The driveway, her car, the world she'd left behind, but then the reflection shifted. Instead of her own face staring back, she saw another. Hollow eyes, pale skin, and a twisted grin that vanished the second she blinked. The window pane cracked under her touch with a sharp snap, spiderwebbing across the glass, but it didn't shatter. It was as if the house itself refused to let her break through. Paragraph 3. Her panic mounting. Emma darted toward another door near the staircase, one she hadn't noticed before. Its surface was rough, marked by deep scratches, like claw marks dragged across the wood. She hesitated, the memory of the rattling doorknob upstairs still fresh, but she forced herself to try. The handle turned easily, and the door swung inward with a groan, revealing a narrow corridor that sloped downward. The air that drifted out was colder, heavy with the scent of mold and soil. It led to the basement. Every nerve in her body screamed not to go, yet the thought of staying in the hallway with the thing upstairs was worse. Paragraph 4. She descended the steps cautiously, her hand trailing along the damp stone wall. The basement was darker than the rest of the house, the kind of darkness that felt thick and living. The beam of her phone flashlight flickered weakly, cutting only a narrow tunnel of visibility through the shadows. Shapes loomed at the edges, covered furniture, rusted tools, boxes collapsed under their own weight. And then she saw something that made her freeze, a row of old, wooden doors built into the foundation itself, each one padlocked shut. They were too small to be rooms, too narrow to be closets. They looked like holding cells. 5. Emma's stomach knotted as she took a step closer, the beam of light trembling in her hand. One of the padlocks was broken, the door hanging slightly ajar. From within came the faintest sound, like whispering, but lower, thicker, as though the voices were muffled by earth. She reached out, her fingers inches from the wood, when a sudden slam echoed from upstairs. The sound was sharp and violent, like every door in the house had just shut at once. Her flashlight flickered again, and in that strobing moment, she saw it. The pale figure standing at the bottom of the stairs, blocking her way back up. Emma's flashlight quivered in her grip as the pale figure lingered at the bottom of the stairs. It didn't move, only watched, as if testing her. Her body screamed to flee, yet some part of her mind whispered that whatever waited behind the ajar cellar door might explain why she had been lured here. Summoning every shred of courage, she stepped sideways, keeping her eyes on the figure while edging closer to the broken door. The wood was warped and swollen, the iron hinges flaking with rust, but a faint draft seeped through the crack, carrying with it the acrid smell of earth long undisturbed. She nudged the door open with her foot. The hinges groaned, loud and painful in the silence. Her flashlight beam swept across a narrow space no larger than a closet. Inside, the walls were bare stone, but the floor, Emma's breath caught, was covered with claw marks. Long, desperate scratches dug deep into the wood, as though someone had tried to claw their way out. The marks overlapped, some old and faded, others newer, fresher, as though they had been made only days ago. Her stomach churned as she realized what these cells had been for. They weren't for storing tools. They were for holding people. Something lay in the corner of the cell. Emma's light fell across a bundle of rotting cloth, half buried in dirt. She crouched, trembling, and brushed away the grime. What she uncovered was small, delicate, a child's shoe. Her throat tightened, her chest squeezing with grief and horror. She looked closer and saw another scratch in the wood, but this one was different. Not desperate gouges, but carved letters. Shaking, she traced them with her fingers. "They won't let us leave." Her vision blurred with tears she hadn't realized she was holding back. Behind her, the basement air shifted. Emma froze, the hairs on her neck rising as a whisper floated through the room. It was faint at first, barely more than breath. Then it grew, multiplying, voices overlapping until they filled every corner of the cellar. Some sobbed, some begged, some muttered prayers through clenched teeth. She spun toward the sound, the flashlight beam cutting wildly across the stone walls until it landed back on the staircase. The pale figure was gone. Only the wet imprint of bare feet remained on the stone floor, leading deeper into the basement's shadows. Emma backed into the cell doorway, her pulse hammering. The voices pressed closer, echoing off the walls, impossible to locate. She clutched the flashlight tighter, her breath ragged, and took one cautious step toward the footprints. The whispers hushed instantly, plunging the room into silence so sudden it felt unnatural. Then, right at her ear, a child's voice spoke, soft and trembling, "Don't follow him." The flashlight sputtered violently, and for a split second, the beam illuminated a small figure crouched beside her in the cell, pale, hollow-eyed, and reaching for her hand. Emma's whole body trembled as she stared at the pale child crouched in the cell. Its hollow eyes glistened faintly, not with malice, but with something softer, fear. The small hand it extended toward her shook as though begging for comfort. Against every instinct to recoil, Emma hesitated, then slowly lowered her flashlight to the ground. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The child tilted its head, and for the first time, Emma noticed that its lips didn't move when it spoke. The words simply filled the space around her, soft and echoing. "We can't leave. Neither can you." Her breath caught, panic threatening to take hold, but the child's voice continued, urgent and pleading. "He keeps us here. The pale one. He comes when we cry. He makes us stay." Emma's eyes darted to the scratches on the floor, the frantic gouges dug into the wood. She swallowed hard, her chest tightening. "Who is he?" she asked, forcing the words past her dry throat. The child's form flickered, its edges blurring like smoke. "He was the first. The house made him. Now he makes us." The whisper was so faint Emma had to strain to catch it. But the weight of the words pressed into her bones. The air in the basement shifted, colder, heavier, and the child's gaze snapped toward the shadows where the footprints had led. Its eyes widened with terror. "He's coming." The words weren't loud, but they cut through the silence like a knife. The pale figure emerged slowly from the darkness, gliding forward with its head bowed, its limbs too long, too loose. Emma's body screamed to run, but the child's ghost clutched her hand, its touch icy and feather-light. "Don't look at his face," the child whispered. "If you see him, you stay." Emma's heart pounded so loudly she thought it would draw the figure closer. The child tugged her toward the back of the cell, where the shadows thickened unnaturally against the wall. Emma blinked, realizing there was a narrow opening there, half hidden behind collapsed boards. The child pointed with its trembling hand. "There, a way out." The pale figure's whispering grew louder now, echoing through the basement like a tide of broken voices. Emma forced her shaking legs to move, crouching low as she slipped toward the opening. Her flashlight flickered weakly, casting fractured beams across the stone floor. As she crawled toward the gap, Emma risked one last glance back. The child was still there, standing at the edge of the cell, its hand lifted as though in farewell. The pale figure loomed behind it now, its hollow eyes fixed directly on Emma, though its head remained bowed. The whispers around her rose to a deafening pitch, drowning out the storm above. Just as Emma squeezed through the gap, the child's voice cut through them all, sharp and clear. Don't let him follow you. Then the opening closed behind her, sealing her in darkness with only the storm's distant rumble guiding her forward. The narrow opening closed behind Emma with a dull thud, leaving her in suffocating darkness. She pressed her back against the damp stone, her lungs pulling in shallow, uneven breaths. The tunnel smelled of soil and rot, like something buried long ago. She fumbled for her flashlight, its beams sputtering weakly to life, cutting a thin path through the shadows. The space was so narrow she had to crouch, her shoulders brushing the jagged stone walls on either side. Above her, the storm was muffled, distant, as though the earth itself were swallowing her whole. She crawled forward, the beam of her light catching glints of rust and bone-white fragments half buried in the dirt floor. At first she told herself they were animal remains, but the shape of a finger bone, small and delicate, told her otherwise. Her stomach lurched, while burning her throat, but she forced herself onward. Every few feet, she passed more scratches carved into the walls, desperate words etched into the stone with fingernails or whatever scraps of metal had been at hand. No way out. He watches. Don't look. Each phrase dug deeper into her already frayed nerves. The tunnel split into two paths ahead, the darkness swallowing her light. Emma froze, torn between the left passage and the right. The left carried a faint draft of air, cool and damp, as if it might lead outside. The right was silent, heavy, but she thought she heard something faint, a child's sob, muffled and broken. Her hands shook violently as she gripped the flashlight tighter. She remembered the child's warning, don't let him follow you. But if other souls were trapped down here, could she really turn away? She chose the right tunnel. The sobs grew clearer as she crawled, her knees scraping against stone, her palms slick with dirt. Hello, she whispered, her voice trembling. The crying stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the sound shifted, no longer a sob, but a laugh. Low, hollow, stretching too long. Emma's blood iced over. She whipped her flashlight ahead just as the beam caught something moving. A pale hand reached around the corner of the tunnel wall, its fingers stretching impossibly far, dragging claws across the stone with a shriek. Emma scrambled backward, her light shaking wildly as the pale figure slid into the tunnel ahead, its body folding unnaturally to fit the cramped space. Its head tilted, scraping against the low ceiling, its hollow eyes fixed on her now with full intent. There was nowhere to run, only back the way she came. Heart hammering, she turned and crawled frantically toward the other passage, her breath ragged, dirt filling her nails. Behind her, the pale figure moved faster than she thought possible, its limbs scraping, its whispers filling the tunnel. Stay, stay, stay. Emma's hands clawed through the dirt as she crawled, her knees raw from stone and grit. The whispers of the pale figure filled the tunnel behind her, pressing close, promising that she could never leave. The air grew colder, heavier, until her lungs burned with every shallow breath. Just as panic began to overtake her, the ground beneath her palms gave way. With a sharp cry, she tumbled forward into an open cavity, her flashlight slipping from her grip and clattering across the stones. She landed hard, her shoulders striking the floor, pain flaring down her arm. The flashlight rolled in a circle before coming to rest, its beam casting wild shadows across the walls of a wider chamber. Emma pushed herself upright, groaning, and froze. The chamber was lined with skeletal remains, some collapsed in heaps, others slumped upright as though posed. Rusted chains hung from the walls, their metal fused with bone where wrists had once been shackled. The stench of old decay hit her like a wave, sour and suffocating that a sudden thud behind her made her whip around. Dirt spilled from the ceiling as the pale figure's long, white arm reached into the chamber, fingers splayed, nails scraping across the stone. Emma scrambled for her flashlight, clutching it tight. The figure's head appeared next, bending unnaturally as it forced itself into the room, its hollow eyes fixed on her, and this time, there was no mistaking the hunger in its stare. The whispers in her head sharpened into words. Stay, stay, stay with me. Emma's survival instinct screamed. She swung the flashlight beam directly into the pale figure's face, and for the first time, it recoiled, hissing like steam escaping a kettle. The shadows writhed around it as though alive, pulling back from the light. Heart pounding, Emma seized the chance, searching the chamber desperately. At the far wall, half-collapsed stones revealed a sliver of another passage. She crawled toward it, dirt grinding under her nails as the pale figure's hiss turned into a guttural roar. Just as she reached the opening, the chamber shook violently, stones crashing down from the ceiling. Dust filled her lungs, choking her, as the walls trembled. The house was shifting, as if aware of her defiance. The pale figure surged forward, its long arms swiping inches from her ankle. Emma threw herself through the gap, dragging her body into the darkness beyond as the chamber behind her collapsed in a deafening roar. For a moment there was only silence, her body pressed flat against the cold earth. And then, faintly, she heard it again, the child's voice, distant but insistent. "Keep going. Don't stop now."